There are many technologies which conspiracy theorists claim exist behind a shroud of government or corporate secrecy. Every year, over 5,300 patents are suppressed by the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office. And many other technologies are held back deliberately by corporations fearful of what it might do to their profit, with the release of vehicles such as the Prius, the Volt, the Leaf, and Tesla. But the very first electrically charged battery-powered car was actually built way back in 1884 by Thomas Parker. And at first, until more advanced combustion engines were developed, electric cars seemed set to dominate. So why has it taken so long? The simple answer is money. And the first volley in the war started back when electric trolley technology looked set to flourish in cities throughout North America during the 20th century, when more advanced battery designs were developed. Chevron bought them up to prevent them being used. That's pretty darn sneaky. The oil company Mobil also took out advertisements in magazines disparaging electric cars, claiming they were dangerous and would probably touch your kids when you weren't looking. But even though 3/4 of the public have consistently said they would purchase an electric car, General Motors deliberately sabotaged the 1996 EV1 vehicle and destroyed as many of its existing models as they could, falsely claiming a lack of demand from the public. At 6, a safer smoke. The dangers of smoking have been known by cigarette companies for decades now. But at first, this information was withheld from the public, or downplayed in seriousness, in order to protect their profits. Because of the subterfuge, millions have died throughout the 20th and 21st centuries from cancers, emphysema. But did you know that many of these lives could have been saved if it weren't for the bullying of one single company? In the 1960s, the Liggett & Myers tobacco firm created the XA cigarette, a new style of smoke which contained barely any of the carcinogenic elements of regular cigarettes. But there was a problem. The rival Philip Morris company thought that the creation of a safe cigarette implied that regular old cancer sticks were dangerous. So they, along with the rest of the industry, threatened Liggett & Myers with expulsion from the Tobacco Institute. And so, despite the fact that Liggett & Myers researchers had already published evidence of the XA's success, the company were forced to deny the dangers of tobacco use in a press release, and the XA was suppressed, at the cost of hundreds of millions of lives. In at number 4, the TENS device. TENS stands for transcutaneous electrical nerve stimulation, and not totally excellent nipple stimulator as I personally hoped. Devices which use this technology do so to help relieve pain by stimulating human nerves. But shortly after the first wearable TENS machines were developed in the 1970s, the drug cosmetics and baby oil firm Johnson & Johnson bought up one of the most promising companies behind that technology, StimTech, and choked off their funding to protect the sales of Tylenol. The founders of StimTech later won a $100 million lawsuit against Johnson & Johnson for destroying their product. And despite the fact that this was later overturned on a technicality, the court's ruling that Johnson & Johnson had held back the device was upheld. Today, TENS devices are making something of a comeback, but just like the electric car, it may be some time before we see the technology develop to an advanced commercial level. Number 3. Digital camera. In the days before mobile phones and digital cameras made sweet love to form the smartphone, humans were forced to use film, and these had to be processed down at the chemist, the photo store, or your darkroom. Kodak was the world's leading manufacturer of photographic film, but in 1975, they stumbled upon a technology so revolutionary it could destroy their entire business: digital photography. By the mid-80s, Kodak had developed the technology to 1 megapixel, but they deliberately smothered the digital baby in its crib due to their reliance on physical film sales. As the 90s approached, Kodak's competitors started creating their own digital cameras, releasing them without hesitation and pretty much destroying Kodak's business. By 2012, Kodak had filed for bankruptcy, and today the company is a shell of its former self. 2. thorium, a potential replacement for uranium, and described by scientists as a solution to mankind's power needs which could last 1,000 years. Thorium is known to be cleaner, safer, and more abundant than uranium. And it's this last part that's got folks in the energy industry spooked. Despite the fact that many world governments have spoken of thorium's potential, it still remains on the back burner due to the lower profits gained from tapping into this energy source and the inevitable startup costs for developing thorium reactors. But the real reason thorium hasn't been developed yet is that you can't make it into a weapon easily. So despite knowing of thorium's potential since World War II, we just weren't interested because we couldn't have the byproduct of blow stuff up with it. And at number 1, free energy. The most controversial entry on this list is undoubtedly this one: the possible suppression of free energy technology developed by Nikola Tesla over 100 years ago. Tesla's famous experiments at Wardenclyffe Tower first attempted to use large towers to transmit messages across the Atlantic, and this venture was initially funded by financier J.P. Morgan. But when Tesla proposed developing the project further into one which would allow the transmission of free energy worldwide and on demand, Morgan backed out of the project. Tesla's funding was stopped, his experiments became limited, and he died penniless in New York, with much of his life's work represented on paper and most of it confiscated in mysterious circumstances. The idea of this technology being suppressed isn't so hard to believe, nor is it impossible that Tesla might have been onto something. After all, this was the man behind the AC current you're using to power your home today, a technology which itself was delayed by Thomas Edison's aggressive attempts to sell his inferior DC current invention